from this past week's message. So we ended a series called Messy. We talked about loving others, and how it's not easy to love other people. And this week we shift gears. So for the first few weeks, it was talking about loving our neighbor. How do we love our neighbor? Who is our neighbor? And we talked about the person in front of us, right? The person, and really just the person in front of us. Let's love the person in front of us in any way we can. We talked about our neighbors, and we talked about how love is sacrificial. Jesus showed us, he demonstrated on the cross what love looked like. And so we are supposed to demonstrate that kind of love to people. Not just people we like, not just people we get along with, not just people we think, look, and that act like us, but anybody. And so this last week I wanted to shift gears because I think this is an important thing, and I think this is something that is a struggle, and some of the feedback I've gotten from this message touched some people, and I think some of you were like, well, this message really wasn't for me, but I think we all know somebody that struggles with this topic we talked about, struggles with self-worth, self-love. We don't necessarily like what we see when we look in the mirror. We know people that don't like themselves, and maybe they don't ever say that, but with their behavior, right? They're not very kind. They're not very patient. They're not very loving to people around them. Typically, when you are not loving to people, you are not very loving to yourself. I mean, you can't love yourself more. 10 times in the New Testament, the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what we kind of talked about. One of the aspects we talked about on Sunday, to love yourselves. How can we do that? How do we show ourselves self-love? And I went through 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and I only basically read the first two things. Love is patient and love is kind. I think those two, in a nutshell, define the rest of what 1 Corinthians 13 says. You can put those as maybe pillars, I guess you could call them, if you will. Patience is what is basically, when we say that, what do we look at in this thing? So the first thought that we had was about being patient and being kind, and showing people that kind of love. And so patience is what love is able to handle. Kindness is what love is, what love gives out. Sorry. So to me, those are the two defining things. Where is your energy, your focus, your patience level at with yourself? Because if you're not very patient with yourself, you're certainly not going to be very patient with others. And James talks about that, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete and lacking nothing. Patience is so critical for our health, for our ability to love others and love ourselves. And so we talked about that, and kindness is what you're able to give out. Love is able to give out. And so as we look at this idea of being patient, are we patient with ourselves? That's the question I asked us. Are we patient with ourselves? Are we kind to ourselves? Because it's so important for us to do that. Now, the last aspect, and I think is the root of this, some of these two are critical for being able to love other people, being able to love yourself, is realizing that God, it says in 1 John that we love God because he first loved us. Okay, so this is such a key thing. God is love, as Scripture says. He is love itself. Okay, And to me, I never really had this thought before, but to me that, you know what, if I am not a Christian and I don't have God's love in me, then I don't really express love to people, okay? Now we might think, well, I love this person, I'm in love with this person. What we might feel like we've had those feelings and thoughts of love, okay? But what I truly think is that because God is love, and if you don't have God in you, you can't have true love in you. Therefore, it's a cheap knockoff. And so when we're looking for love in all the wrong places and all the wrong people, then that we're chasing something that we will never, ever find. But God himself is the only thing that can satisfy that. So he gives us love. We can then give him love back because he gave it to us first. The second thing is now we have the ability for the love of God to flow in us and through us to others. We did not have that ability before, okay? We could be, somewhat nice to people, but love by definition in our world is actually, love is lust, love is conditional. Love is something you can fall into and out of. And none of that's true. That's not what love is. In fact, 1 Corinthians keeps going on and says what love really is. And most of us would go, well, some of the love relationships I've had in my life with my father, with family, with even good friends, like don't resemble any of what 1 Corinthians love looks like. And I think the reason is because God is the source of love, because he is love. And so if God is within you, you can have that source of love within you. But if God is not in you, if you are not a believer, then you just give a knockoff, a cheap knockoff of love. The last thing, and I think is so critical, is that we have to receive God's love, okay? This is the key to this whole thing working. You can't love yourself if you don't receive God's love, okay? It starts with him, it comes to you, and then you certainly can't love others if you don't love yourself and the love doesn't flow through you. And so, receiving God's love. And I challenge some people in this message, and I would challenge you. If you think poorly of yourself, if you don't think you're worthy of love from people, let alone God, then I would challenge you to look in a mirror and say this: I am worthy of God's love. I receive God's love. Positive affirmations is an important thing. The Bible tells us that words have the power to build up or tear down, according to James. And so we can do this. If you are struggling in your life, look in the say, I don't know how many, say it 10 times in the morning, 10 times in the evening, before you go to bed, and just make that a part of your routine. Because I think it's so important. I think it will change your view of yourself. It'll change your view of God's love, and you'll receive it. And that's ultimately what it's all about. And so that's what we talked about this week. If you can't love yourself, how can you love others? I mean, really, that's the basis of it. If you can't receive the love of God, and I don't think this is just for new Christians. I think this is for veterans and longtime believers, because sometimes I think we fall short of remembering. That's why we did communion. Communion is a reminder to us of what God's love is and what he did for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That we are unable. He that was no sin became sin for us so that we could be forever reunited with God. That's the hope we have. And it starts with realizing and remembering God's love for us. And if we aren't good at loving others, maybe it's because we need to look in the mirror and start being patient with ourselves, being kinder to ourselves. And then, when we do that, maybe then the love of God can flow through us to others. And so that was my challenge for all of us this past week. If you haven't seen, if you missed some of the series that we did, Messy, we're about to start a brand new series this coming Sunday. I'm really excited about it. And as we've talked about this whole Messy thing, we started a Mission to Marshfield campaign, which was to raise funds, to build a fund so that you could go out and love your neighbors. And we would have a resource for you to supply those needs. So whether it's money, whether it's things, whatever that looks like. So we're kind of in that phase. We raised $20,000 to help people. The first phase was to raise the funds, and now we're looking for you to look around, to get outside of your comfort zone and get messy in people's lives and see their needs. Bring us those needs, and we'll have the ability to fund those needs, or we're going to try to fund as many as we can. And so that's the challenge, Calvary. Let's do that. Let's take this next step. I hope my email, my inbox, my private messenger, my phone, the church line, I hope that we start to hear and get a flow of people sending in, hey, my neighbor needs this, my coworker needs this, I want to help this and do this. And I hope we start to see that, because that to me is what's next for us in this messy love idea and this Mission to Marshfield campaign. So that's my Sunday in review for this past week. Like I said, this week coming up, we are in a new series, and we're calling it Blessed, and I'm excited about it. So if you want to tune into that, 10:45 Sunday mornings here on Facebook or YouTube, or you can come in person at 300 South Walnut Street for our in-person campus. So thanks for watching. Have a good night.